The orders arrived on a Tuesday, written in the cramped hand of a colonel who had never once ridden beyond the garrison walls. 7 names on the list. 7 riders to be assembled by nightfall and gone before the garrison's morning bell. Sergeant Aldous Crane read the list twice, standing in the cold doorway of the dispatch office, and said nothing. He had learned long ago that saying nothing was the safest response to orders that made no sense. The mission was simple, the colonel had written. Simple in the way that a man who has never done a hard thing in his life describes hard things. A supply convoy, 12 wagons, 32 civilians, a season's worth of medicine and grain for the eastern settlements, had been taken at the Callow Narrows 2 nights ago, held now by a company of armed raiders who knew every trail, every ridge, and every approach road better than the garrison's own scouts. The garrison's standing force was 3 days' ride away, committed elsewhere. There would be no relief column. The hostages would be moved by the second dawn, which left 7 riders in 1 night. Aldous folded the paper, tucked it into his coat, and went to read the rest of his list. The first 5 names he knew: 2 former cavalry outriders, grounded by old injuries, a tracker who drank too much and talked even more, a young farrier who was the best horseman in the district and knew it, a retired signals officer who still kept her mirror kit polished but hadn't been called up in 11 years. None of them were what a colonel would have chosen. All of them were what Aldous had left. The 6th name on the list had been crossed out and written over twice, as if whoever had been making the list kept changing their mind. The name that finally stayed was one Aldous didn't recognize at all: Vreth. No rank, no unit, just the one word, and below it, in someone else's handwriting, the orc: stables, ask Henner. Aldous found Henner, the stable master, pitching hay in the last stall on the left. Henner was a small, weathered man who had been at the garrison longer than anyone could remember. Vreth, Aldous said. Henner didn't look up from his pitchfork. She's in the paddock, far side. Who is she? Hired guide. Came through last spring with a trade party. Party moved on. She stayed. Henner finally looked up. She knows the Callow Narrows better than any man in this garrison, Sergeant. She was born in those hills. Aldous walked to the paddock. She was standing at the fence with her back to him, watching the horses with the careful stillness of someone who is used to being watched herself. She was tall, taller than any of his outriders, with the broad, squared shoulders of someone who had spent years in rough country, and skin the color of old oak bark, and braids that had been pinned back for travel. She wore a plainsman's coat and worn leather boots, and carried nothing at her belt except a folded map case and a small blade for trail work. When she heard him approach, she turned, unhurried. "Sergeant," she said. She had a voice like a millstone, low and even, with no decoration in it. "You're Vreth." "I am." "You know the Narrows. Every approach, every ridge trail, every hollow where a man can hide 12 wagons and not be seen from the road." She watched him. "I know where they are, Sergeant. I came to your dispatch office this morning to say so, and the man at the desk told me to wait in the stables." Aldous absorbed that. "He told you to wait in the stables." "He did." There was no anger in her face when she said it, just the flat, settled patience of a woman who had learned not to waste energy on the predictable. "I'm sorry," Aldous said. She looked at him for a moment the way a person looks at something unexpected. "Do you want to know where they are, or not?" He did. They rode out at dusk, all 7 of them, and Aldous watched his little band in the failing light and did not feel encouraged. The tracker had already talked more than anyone needed to hear. The young farrier kept adjusting his stirrups. The signals officer rode with the quiet, inward focus of someone running through drills in her head. The 2 outriders looked at the orc woman and then looked away and then looked back and then away again, which was about what Aldous had expected. Vreth rode at the front and said nothing. An hour out from the garrison, when the road narrowed into the first of the hill passes, she raised one hand and stopped them without a word. She pointed to the ridgeline to the east. 3 of them saw nothing. Two squinted and admitted they saw nothing. The signals officer reached for her mirror kit without being asked. "There's a sentry," Vreth said, "halfway up behind the gray rocks. He changes out every 2 hours. The next change is in 40 minutes. "How do you know that?" the tracker asked. "Because I watched them for 6 hours before I came to your garrison." She lowered her hand and turned to Aldous. "There is a dry creek bed that runs behind the eastern ridge. It is not on any garrison map. It comes out 40 yards below the hollow where they have the wagons. If we go by the road, they will see us from 3 directions. If we go by the creek bed, we come out behind them below the sentry line." "You said there are how many?" 22 riders, 12 of them posted around the wagons. The other 10 are camped at the north end of the hollow where there is a fire and the sound of talking. They are confident." She met his eyes. "Confident men do not listen well." Aldous looked at his 6 riders. The tracker had stopped talking. The farrier had stopped adjusting his stirrups. "Show us the creek bed," Aldous said. She showed them. The dry creek bed was narrow and rocky, and completely invisible from the road, running along the base of the eastern ridge in a shallow cut that would have looked like a drainage shadow to anyone who didn't know to look. They went in single file, leading the horses by the bridle, and the signals officer kept her mirror steady against her side so it caught no moonlight. Vreth moved ahead of them in the dark without once hesitating. 2/3 of the way along, she stopped them again with a raised hand. She crouched, and after a moment Aldous crouched beside her. She pointed. 20 yards ahead, where the creek bed curved, there was a man sitting on a rock with his back to them, looking out at the road below. A sentry they hadn't known about, not on any pattern she had observed. Aldous watched her face in the dark. She was thinking, not panicking, not recalculating her own value. Thinking. Her eyes moved over the terrain with the same unhurried precision she had shown at the paddock fence, and after 30 seconds she touched his arm and pointed to the left, where a fold in the hillside offered a narrow shelf above the creek bed. She held up 2 fingers and pointed to herself and the signals officer. She pointed above and past the sentry. The signals officer nodded once and moved without a sound. The 2 of them went up the shelf in the dark and came out 30 yards beyond the sentry on the far side, and the sentry heard nothing at all, and after 2 minutes Vreth's hand appeared around the fold of the hill with 2 fingers raised. Clear. They came out of the creek bed into the lower edge of the hollow, exactly where she had said they would. What happened in the next 20 minutes was not elegant, and it was not without its moments of chaos. The tracker knocked over a lantern he'd been told not to touch. The farrier's horse stamped once at the wrong moment, and one of the outriders came in from the wrong angle and had to be waved back. But Vreth moved through the hollow with a certainty that made even the chaos feel navigable. She knew which shadows held men, which gaps between wagons were safe, which direction the wind was running so that sound carried away from the camp and not toward it. She said almost nothing. She pointed, she moved, she waited, and she never once wasted a step. By the time the raider camp at the north end of the hollow realized what was happening, the civilians had been moved, and the wagons turned, and Aldous' small, ramshackle band was already at the creekbed entrance with the hostages between them. The chase that followed was brief. The outriders knew how to ride. The farrier handled the rear with the cool attention of someone who had always known he was good at his work, and Vreth took them back through the creek bed in the dark at a pace that should have been impossible. When they came out on the road below the ridge, with the hollow already disappearing behind them and the raider pursuit tangled in terrain they didn't know, Aldous looked at her and she looked at him, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "You knew that bed in the dark," he said, "without a lantern." "I told you," she said, "I was born in those hills." They made the garrison before the morning bell. 32 civilians delivered, 12 wagons intact, 7 riders accounted for. The colonel came out to the courtyard in a dressing gown and stood blinking at the convoy in the early light, clearly having expected something smaller than success. Aldous gave his report, standing in the courtyard with the dawn coming up pink behind the eastern ridge. He gave every name and every action clearly and in order. When he reached Vreth's name, the colonel glanced past him to where she stood with the horses, and Aldous said it again, so the colonel looked at him instead. She knew the ground, Aldous said. She had scouted the hollow before she came to us. She found the approach road, she identified the sentry positions, she navigated the creek bed in full dark, and she moved the hostages before the camp realized what we were doing. If she is not in the dispatch record by name and in full, I will write it myself and send a copy to the district command. The colonel opened his mouth. Then he closed it. Then he said he would see to the paperwork personally. Aldous thanked him and walked back to the horses. The band was dispersing, the tracker to his bunk, already talking at full volume about the lantern, the farrier giving his horse a long, thorough inspection that had nothing to do with urgency and everything to do with a man who loved his work. The signals officer was already polishing her mirror kit with the small, private satisfaction of someone who had remembered exactly how to do the thing she was best at. Vreth was cinching her saddlebag. Aldous stopped beside her. "You had no reason to bring the garrison into it," he said. "You could have watched the hollow and ridden on." She pulled the cinch strap tight, unhurried. "I could have." "Why didn't you?" She was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone searching for words, but the silence of someone deciding whether the person asking the question has earned the answer. 32 people, she said. "I knew where they were. I counted the riders and I knew a small team could reach them before the second dawn." She looked at him. "It is a straightforward calculation." "Most people would have made a different calculation," Aldous said. "Yes," she said, "I have noticed that." He stood with that for a moment. "The colonel will write the report with your name in it, but I suspect in 3 months he will have found a reason to need another guide, and the stable's master will have to tell someone else to come find you in the paddock." She almost smiled. It was not quite a smile. It was the expression of someone who is not used to being surprised and finds the experience unexpectedly pleasant. "When that happens," Aldous said, "I would rather he sent for you directly." She looked at him again with that measuring steadiness that he was beginning to understand was simply the way she looked at things she considered worth taking seriously. "That would be an improvement," she said. The sun was fully up now, warm on the courtyard stone. Around them the garrison was beginning its ordinary morning, the clatter of the kitchen, the stamp of horses being led to water, the signals officer's voice somewhere calling a cheerful good morning to someone in a third-floor window. "I am going back to the hills for a week," Vreth said. "There is a pass I want to map before the first snow." She finished with the saddlebag and straightened. "If the garrison has further use for someone who knows the ground and doesn't knock over lanterns." "We do," Aldous said. She nodded once, with the plain, unhurried certainty of a person who has decided something and will not be changing her mind. "Then I will come back," she said. And she rode out through the garrison gate into the clean morning light, and Aldous stood in the courtyard and watched her go. And for the first time in a long while, he felt that the eastern hills were something other than a problem waiting to happen. They were territory that someone he trusted knew by heart. That was a feeling he had not expected, and he found he did not want to let it go.